Get this party started. Okay.
All right, I'm pretty sure I captured that, so perfect.
All right. That'll be
My new
awesome.
ringtone.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Johnson, and I'm a member of the Hatched Planning Team. I will be monitoring today's session as well as the chat. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them there. Just so everybody knows, this session will be recorded. So if you're hoping to view it at a later date, you'll be able to do that. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce John Scott Gray, presenting on What Would Plato Read? Using News to Inform Theory.
Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing?
Doing great.
Very good. The response means you can actually hear me. So is my screen shared? Isn't that a gorgeous picture of me? Oh, man, back when I was handsome. Now you just have what you have. And so this is going to be thanks for coming to my short talk. If you're like I am, you loathe meetings that could have just easily been an email. And this presentation may be an example of that phenomenon. Because in that I think the lesson I'm suggesting is not really breaking news to anyone attending this session, and could probably have been summed up in a 30-second soundbite video, which maybe Andrew can do for us later now that he's recording it. Thank you, Andrew, for recording, by the way. It was a big issue before y'all got here. He was very concerned about the recording thing. That said, I'm going to dedicate about 15 minutes talking about a study practice that I've been using in several of my courses for the past 15 years. The innovative practice, innovative, scare quotes, that I will address today is concerned with current event-centered project work, specifically ways in which project work can be reclaimed in a way that allows it to be more effectively used to connect classical philosophical ideas to contemporary problems. What I endeavor to do is to create habits in my students that focuses on active learning by struggling with 21st century real-world challenges. This type of practice can be used in a wide array of educational settings, ranging from grade school to a college, centered around diverse subjects from mathematics. My colleague Victor Piercy does a little bit of this in his courses, to physical sciences, to the humanities. But as a philosopher, I am stuck with trying to talk about my use of this practice in my applied philosophy courses, including bioethics, the philosophy of sex and love, and most importantly for today's paper and presentation, political and social philosophy. So according to the book, How Learning Works, 7 research-based principles for smart teaching by Ambrose Bridges et al., mastery is developed when students, quote, acquire competent skills, practice integrating them, and know when to apply what they have learned. Project work at its core claims to help students accomplish all these elements in varying degrees. As commonly practiced in philosophy courses, however, these projects tend to take the form of abstract thought experiments that have little application to any real-world experience. So let's, for example, there's books like this, filled with thought experiments. This is Peg Tittle's collection, What If? Collected Thought Experiments in Philosophy. This book includes famous thought experiments such as the Judith Jarvis Thomson version of the trolley problem, which I'm sure many of you have already heard of, where a student must decide whether to let a runaway train never going back, kill the 5 people on the track in front of the train, or Todd Stanislav had promised singing in a previous talk, and I just can't get that out of my head, unfortunately. Do we let the train go and kill the 5 people on the track in front of the train, or purposely divert the train to another track where the only one person is destined to perish? I don't know about this person's head here, kind of on the other track. Maybe they're collateral damage, I'm not sure. But this is the kind of thing you see in ethics courses around the country and really around the world to a real degree. So experiments such as these, while a useful measure in assessing the degree to which a student understands the ethical theories of, say, Immanuel Kant or John Stuart Mill, have little relation to the kinds of day-to-day ethical dilemmas that a student will face as they live out their lives. There's no real integration of competent skills taking place. in part because students do not see the scenarios as even really plausible in the first place. So my 300 level political and social philosophy class serves as a, in my view, excellent example of how I try to create the real integration mentioned above. I always schedule my course in the fall of even numbered years, election years, to help give us in the class something to talk about. Maybe I should have had a trigger warning before that slide. I don't know if I'm giving people flashbacks or anything. But election time is a good time to have lots of things to come up in the news to talk about. Students come to the class from a wide range of political backgrounds, and while the conversations can sometimes be heated, we try to maintain an air of respectful consideration of a wide array of views. Now, not only are there political differences in the classroom, but in this course, as in most of my courses, I find myself teaching to students with a wide range of educational backgrounds from a wide range of majors. I have students taking the class as a first and only philosophy class for general education course credit, to philosophy minors who are taking this as their 6th course in the program. So given the range and familiarity with the philosophical process in general, I try to help forward student learning by breaking the course down into weekly units with 2 classes per unit. Within each unit, I incorporate a project assignment to create a laboratory type environment. So while the first session in each week is a traditional course with student presentation, boring lecture by me, and some course discussion, sometimes kicking and screaming, but I will pause for the question and comments like Julie Rowan talked about before. So we'll focus on a seminal text in the field, ranging from classical works of Plato and Aristotle to contemporary things like Cornel West and Martha Nussbaum. The second class of the week will center around contemporary news articles. Students are required to submit news articles to me in advance of the second class, usually 4 hours to 12 hours ahead of time, with a 1-page explanation of how the philosopher of the week helps inform our understanding of the news story, or how the story itself helps us reframe our thinking about the philosopher in question. After I get all these articles, and they have to submit like 7 out of the 13 weeks we do this assignment. So I usually get 10 to 12 articles per week. I will go through and select, 1 to 2 to 3 articles and focus on those. I'll photocopy those and bring those to the class. And I'll give them to the class back when we actually had classes. I could hand out things like paper. And I would have the entire class read the articles in question and become familiar with the issue, or more familiar, I should say. Once the class has spent the 5 to 10 minutes reading the articles, I then transition into a larger conversation about the relevant connections with the philosopher of the week, as well as other readings in the class. Now this there's a bit of learning curve in terms of what qualifies as a contemporary news source. Many students, of course, find themselves drawn to blogs or opinion pieces. I believe in part because the strong opinions contained therein help simplify their analysis, as they find themselves able to either strongly agree or strongly disagree with the perspective that's being offered. While many students may have heard a lot about the news through various social media outlets and opinion pieces such as these, the assignment I give them helps students learn more about how to seek out facts about the world. I know it's a dirty word. Fact is a 4-letter word we can't talk about, but we try to talk about that a bit in this class. Find out facts about the world and then learn how to think about the news that they are consuming. So we discuss things like media bias right off the top. We try to find a middle ground in which there are sources that the entire class can accept as legitimate regardless of our political differences. So requiring students to seek out connections between theory and practice helps solidify their initial understanding of the philosopher at hand. This version of applied philosophy draws inspiration from John Dewey's pragmatism, in particular his ideas on education from Democracy in Education. Sees as its mission in education, quote, a continuous reconstruction of experience. As a study tool, this project, by having students focus on application in their selection of news stories, facilitates a deeper understanding of the philosopher at hand. Students discover new connections as they're given something to do, quote, given something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking or the intentional noting of connections. Learning naturally results, end quote, says Dewey. Never what does he know, though? While Dewey's philosophy is essential to project learning in general, this reclaiming of the practice empowers a two-way interchange in which contemporary issues help students master their understanding of the philosophical text and how the philosophical text can help them become better participatory consumers of news. Furthermore, this type of project work is not centered around abstract or improbable situations, but instead brings philosophy to bear on the particular problems that surround us in the world today. This is in line with the claims in How Learning Works, which argues that teachers need to do more to help students not stay comfortable at the novice level of superficial knowledge structures, and instead help them to grasp rich, meaningful knowledge structures that support increased learning and performance. So looking back at my class last fall, which was because of COVID, virtual, so all the articles were given to me electronically as opposed to slid under my door behind me. And I would, again, pick one or two and then post that in a discussion board, and the discussion would take place on a separate discussion board looking at those news articles. But so last semester, just in the Plato section, which of course chronologically is how the class tends to go, so Plato is one of the first things we cover once we get past the introductory, here's what political philosophy is in general. So it's a section that occurs early in the semester, so it represents some of the students' actually weakest submissions of the year. But there were still several interesting articles that were turned in. So one student submitted an article looking at the Disney remake of the movie Mulan and the calls to boycott the movie over concerns of censorship to please the Chinese Communist Party and protect Disney's interest in China. This student connected the story to Plato's suggestions of and justifications for censorship in the Republic. Another article taken from the New York Times discussed fears of voter intimidation by GOP poll watchers as the elections were drawing closer and closer, connecting the story to the role of the Guardians and the role the Guardians played within Plato's Republic as being, quote, most wise, but also virtuous and selfless, end quote. The student draws some interesting comparisons between what Plato's calling for and our then current administration. The article I chose that week, however, was from the LA Times, and it was titled Appeals Court Rules NSA Spying Program Illegal, but Upholds Terror Convictions. That was written by Christina Davis and published September 2nd, 2020. The details of the article are less significant to me in our talk today than the student analysis and the conversation that arose out of the article. I'm going to post what the student said in part. I can almost hear my communication colleagues across the hall moaning in pain at seeing all the words on one PowerPoint slide. Read along with me, shall you? The article I chose is about, this is quoting the student. The article I chose is about the illegality of an NSA surveillance program. The NSA wiretapped millions of Americans without their consent for years. Just recently, a court ruled that this program violated a Surveillance Act and possibly the Fourth Amendment. This article relates to our reading on Plato because of a story about a magic ring mentioned by Glaucon. Glaucon claims that people only act morally out of necessity. He evidences this claim with a story about a ring with magic powers. The ring grants the user invisibility. Glaucon says that if any man was given the ring, he would use its power unjustly because he would be free of negative consequences. The case of the NSA lends some credence to this point. The NSA had national wiretapping powers, and they used it to spy on innocent Americans. They did not isolate their efforts to evidence terrorists. Instead, they exercised their power broadly and indiscriminately. It was only until a public backlash that this practice continued. Going back to the ring story, the person with the power of invisibility exercised it because there are no repercussions. Likewise, the NSA stopped their surveillance only after the invisible cloak was lifted. Now, the beauty of this analysis is that it pulls out of Plato reading one of those thought experiments I mentioned before, the Ring of Gyges, a science fiction abstract story about a ring that when you turn it, makes you invisible. Hey, good idea for maybe a movie or something. The Ring of Gyges on its surface has no real world application. The student uses it to frame the moral status of the NSA practices, as well as to use this article to get a deeper understanding of what Plato might have intended by using the Ring of Gyges. The conversation in class turned to what students themselves thought they would do if they had the power of the ring. And the journal entries that weekend following saw several students continue the soul searching to try and ascertain what they were made of deep down. Great class conversation. So in conclusion, and in returning to the question that serves as the title of this talk, what would Plato read? My assertion is that Plato would be an avid consumer of news in its many forms and would more than likely subscribe to several news sources to get a wide range of perspectives on the stories of the day. He'd probably read the New York Times. He'd probably watch MSNBC and Fox News from time to time to see the range of perspectives in our country. He'd probably watch BBC News and watch Al Jazeera to try to get perspectives from outside these borders or the borders of wherever he's living at that time. And the spirit of the Socratic method, he would go out and about and talk about the news with anyone willing to dialogue with him. So in conclusion, thank you.
All right, any questions?
So I have a weird side comment that if you haven't played Trial by Trolley, it's a board game / card game. You really need to have a conversation with me at some point in time over some form of beverage in which I can showcase this to you and let you play this board game.
What was the name of that game again? I'm sorry.
It's called Trial by Trolley. And basically what you do is you have two teams, and the goal is to make your track the one that doesn't get run over by either adding bad people to your track or good people to my track. So I might put the Pope on my track, but you might say that he's going to die in a week anyway. And then I would put Hitler on your track, but you would say that he's going to discover the cure for cancer.
The trolley problem has gotten a lot of traction. There's a lot of versions of it. In fact, I saw someone on social media do an updated version that involved having two different trains with two different diversions, and if they both divert, they both kill family members, and they've gotten a lot of traction out of that thought experiment, and it's interesting, and students love talking about it. And I still do use some of those classic experiments in my class. There's another experiment where you have two crash car. You have two cardiac arrests and one crash card. How do you figure out who gets to use that crash card? Some of these thought experiments are very, very interesting and get kind of the intellectual juices flowing. And like I say, that they're a good tool to try to help students, show that they understand how Mill might approach this problem or how Kant might approach this problem. But I don't think there's really, in my experience, a lot of buy-in because they don't really take this seriously. And so I think the news stories are good because they try to get people to take things seriously. But games also do that too. So maybe, Andrew, that game could make an appearance in a future class of mine.
I'd agree, but I'm biased.
That's okay. I like your biases.
All right, any other questions or comments? Silence, wow. Well, thank you, John, for your presentation, and thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you all so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, sir.